The rain hammered against the hospital windows like bullets, each drop a reminder of how quickly life can shatter. I stood there in my $1,000 heels, watching the doctors work frantically on my husband's broken body. And I made a promise that would haunt me for the next 8 years. I swore on that cold linoleum floor that I would never cry again, never show weakness, never let pain control me. I was Margaret Hamilton, and I would be made of steel. But steel, I would learn, can become so cold it freezes everything it touches, including the heart of an 8-year-old girl who needed her mother more than she needed a fortress. My name is Margaret Hamilton, and I'm 62 years old. For most of my adult life, I've been known as the Iron Lady of Wall Street, the woman who could negotiate million-dollar deals without blinking, who built a financial empire from nothing. But before I became that woman, I was just a wife and mother living in our beautiful colonial home in Greenwich, Connecticut. David and I had everything a young couple could dream of. He was a successful architect, I was building my investment firm, and our daughter Emma was the light of our world. She was 8 years old, with her father's warm brown eyes and my stubborn determination. She would run through our house singing off-key Disney songs, leaving a trail of art supplies and laughter in every room. Our life was picture the kind you see in magazines, until October 15, 2015, the day that changed everything forever. David had been working late on a project for a new medical center downtown. The rain that night was torrential, the kind that makes driving treacherous even for experienced drivers. He called me around 9:30, his voice tired but warm. "I'm heading home now, sweetheart. Tell Emma I'll read her 3 stories tonight, instead of 2. Those were the last words I ever heard him say. 20 minutes later, a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into David's sedan at 60 miles per hour. The impact was so severe that the paramedics said he probably didn't suffer. That was supposed to comfort me, but comfort was a luxury I would no longer allow myself. At the hospital, I stood in that sterile hallway wearing my navy business suit, watching through the glass as they tried to save him. Emma was at home with our nanny, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her world was ending. The doctors worked for 3 hours, but I knew from the moment I saw the accident scene that David was gone. When Dr. Rodriguez finally approached me with those devastating words, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hamilton, we did everything we could," something inside me broke so completely that I felt it physically snap. The sob that tried to escape was so violent, so raw, that it terrified me. In that moment of pure agony, I made my vow. I pressed my lips together, straightened my shoulders, and promised myself that I would never again let emotion make me vulnerable. I would never cry, never break, never let anyone see me weak. I thought I was protecting myself and Emma. I had no idea I was building a prison. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it was methodical and complete. After David's funeral, which I orchestrated with the precision of a military operation, I threw myself into work with an intensity that frightened even my business partners. Hamilton Investments had been a small but successful firm before David's death. Within 2 years, I had expanded it into one of the most aggressive investment companies on the East Coast. I worked 18-hour days, made deals that others wouldn't dare attempt, and accumulated wealth at a rate that made financial magazines write feature stories about my success. The media called me brilliant, ruthless, unstoppable. What they didn't see was the woman who came home to a silent house every night, who ate dinner alone while her daughter picked at her food in silence. Emma had stopped talking after the funeral. At first, the child psychologist assured me it was normal grief, that she would recover with time and patience. But weeks turned to months, and months turned to years, and my daughter remained locked in her own world of silence. She would nod or shake her head to answer direct questions, but the singing, the laughter, the constant chatter that had once filled our home was gone. I told myself that work was helping both of us, that the financial security I was building would give Emma everything she needed. I hired the best tutors, enrolled her in private schools, made sure she had every material advantage, but I couldn't give her the one thing she truly needed because I had locked it away so deep that I wasn't sure it still existed. If you've ever experienced a loss that felt like losing part of your soul, leave the word strength in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. And please, subscribe to hear more stories that prove we're never alone in our struggles. By the time Emma turned 12, our relationship had become a careful dance of polite distance. She was brilliant in school, excelling in mathematics and art, but she moved through life like a ghost. Our conversations, when they happened, were purely functional. Do you need anything for school? Are you hungry? Do you have your homework finished? She would nod or shake her head, and I would retreat to my office, telling myself that this was enough, that we were both coping in our own ways. The house that had once been filled with David's architectural drawings, scattered across the dining room table, and Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator became a museum of silence. I kept it perfectly maintained, hired the best cleaning services, made sure every room looked like it belonged in architectural digests, but it felt like a beautiful tomb. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was becoming more successful in business, I was failing completely as a mother. My clients respected me, my competitors feared me, and financial journalists wrote about my Midas touch with investments. Hamilton Investments managed portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I owned properties in Manhattan, the Hamptons, and Aspen. I collected art, drove luxury cars, and wore designer clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. From the outside, I had everything a woman could want. But success, I learned, is a poor substitute for connection. And wealth means nothing when you're emotionally bankrupt. The worst part was watching Emma grow up from a distance, like she was behind glass. She inherited David's artistic talent and began creating the most hauntingly beautiful paintings I'd ever seen. Her art teacher would send home pieces that took my breath away, landscapes that seemed to capture emotions I couldn't express, portraits that revealed depths of feeling I didn't know my daughter possessed. But when I tried to talk to her about her art, she would simply nod and walk away. I would stand in her room sometimes, looking at the paintings covering her walls, and wonder if this was how she communicated now, if her brushstrokes held all the words she wouldn't say to me. I wanted to reach out, to break through the wall of silence between us, but I didn't know how. I had become so good at maintaining emotional distance that I had forgotten how to close it. The years blurred together. In a haze of board meetings, acquisition deals, and quarterly reports, Emma moved through adolescence like she was sleepwalking, polite but unreachable. She never brought friends home, never asked for anything beyond basic necessities, never caused trouble. She was the perfect teenager in every way except the one that mattered most. She wasn't really living. On her 16th birthday, I threw her an elaborate party at the country club, invited her entire grade, hired a band, and had a cake that looked like a work of art. She smiled politely, thanked everyone who came, and went through all the motions of celebration. But I could see in her eyes that she was just performing, going through the expected behaviors without any real joy. That night, after all the guests had gone home, I found her sitting in the garden behind our house, still in her party dress, staring at the stars. I almost approached her, almost sat down beside her, and tried to have a real conversation. But the fear of her rejection, of my own emotional inadequacy, stopped me. I went back inside and poured myself a glass of wine, telling myself that she was fine, that we were both fine. The wake-up call came when Emma was 17, not in the form of a crisis or a dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet observation of a family friend. Patricia Morrison had been David's business partner's wife, and she had known our family for years. She came to our annual Christmas party, a lavish affair I hosted more for business networking than celebration. After most of the guests had left, Patricia lingered, helping me clean up glasses and straightening furniture. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I've been watching you and Emma tonight, and I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear." I braced myself, expecting criticism about Emma's quiet behavior or lack of social engagement. Instead, Patricia said something that hit me like a physical blow. "You both look like you're drowning, but you're drowning separately. That beautiful girl needs her mother, and unless I'm completely wrong, you need your daughter just as much." Her words followed me for weeks, echoing in my head during long business meetings and sleepless nights. The truth is that by the time Emma turned 18, I had built such a successful wall around my emotions that I had almost convinced myself I was happy. Hamilton Investments was worth over $200 million. I was regularly quoted in financial publications, invited to speak at conferences around the world, and considered one of the most influential women in finance. My personal wealth had grown to the point where money was never a consideration for anything I wanted. But success, I was beginning to understand, is a hollow achievement when you have no one to share it with. Emma was preparing for college, having been accepted to several prestigious art programs. She planned to study fine arts at Yale, and I was proud of her accomplishments. Even though our conversations about her future were stilted and formal, "Congratulations on Yale," I had said when her acceptance letter arrived. "Thank you," she had replied. And that was the extent of our celebration. I watched her pack for college with the same emotional distance I applied to everything else, telling myself that this separation was natural, that all parents went through this transition. What I didn't expect was how empty the house would feel. After Emma left for college, for years, I had grown accustomed to our polite distance, our careful avoidance of real intimacy. But her physical absence created a void that I couldn't fill with work or acquisitions or any of the distractions I had used to avoid dealing with my grief. The silence that had once felt protective now felt suffocating. I would walk through the house at night, past Emma's room with its art supplies still scattered across the desk, past the kitchen where David used to make his terrible experimental recipes, past the living room where we had once watched movies as a family. The success I had worked so hard to achieve felt meaningless when there was no one to share it with. No one who cared whether I closed another big deal or acquired another property. Emma called once a week during her freshman year. Dutiful conversations that lasted exactly long enough to be polite. "How are your classes? Do you need anything? Are you eating well?" I would ask the same questions every time, and she would give me the same brief, polite answers. "Classes are good. I don't need anything. I'm eating fine." Then we would both struggle to fill the remaining minutes with small talk before saying goodbye. I began to dread those calls almost as much as I looked forward to them, because they highlighted how little we really knew each other, how successfully I had managed to remain a stranger to my own daughter. I want you to know that the most beautiful transformations often begin in our darkest moments. Emma's college years were both the loneliest period of my life and the beginning of my awakening. Subscribe to join me on this journey of rediscovering what truly matters. The crisis that finally cracked my carefully constructed emotional armor came during Emma's sophomore year of college, and it had nothing to do with family or relationships. Hamilton Investments faced its first major challenge when one of our biggest clients, a tech startup I had personally invested millions in, was exposed for massive fraud. The scandal threatened not only my company's reputation but the personal savings of hundreds of clients who trusted me with their financial futures. For the first time in over a decade, I faced the possibility of professional failure, and with it, the collapse of the identity I had built as an unshakable business leader. The stress was overwhelming, unlike anything I had experienced since David's death. I worked around the clock, hired the best lawyers, and fought to protect my clients' investments and my company's reputation. But the strain was taking a physical toll that I couldn't ignore or control. It was during this crisis, 3 weeks of 18-hour days and constant stress, that my carefully maintained facade finally cracked. I was in my office at 2 in the morning, reviewing legal documents, when I felt a sharp pain in my chest. For a moment, I thought I might be having a heart attack, but it wasn't physical pain. It was emotional. The grief I had been suppressing for 8 years came rushing back with such force that I couldn't breathe. I found myself thinking about David, really thinking about him for the first time since his funeral. I remembered how he would have handled this crisis, how he would have stayed calm and supportive, how he would have reminded me that money and success meant nothing compared to the people we love. And then I thought about Emma, alone at college, probably struggling with her own challenges while her mother was too wrapped up in business to notice or care. The sob that escaped me that night was the first real emotion I had allowed myself to feel in 8 years. Once it started, I couldn't stop. I cried for David, for the marriage we had lost, for the father Emma would never have. I cried for all the moments I had missed with my daughter, all the conversations we never had, all the comfort I had failed to provide during her most vulnerable years. Most of all, I cried for the woman I had become, so focused on protecting herself from pain that she had forgotten how to love. The crisis with my company eventually resolved. We managed to protect most of our clients and rebuild our reputation. But something fundamental had changed in me. I realized that all the success in the world meant nothing if I didn't have anyone to share it with, and more importantly, if I continued to fail the one person who mattered most. The decision to reach out to Emma wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet and desperate. I called her on a Tuesday evening in March, not for our usual weekly check-in, but because I genuinely wanted to know how she was doing. "Emma," I said when she answered, "I know this might sound strange, but I was wondering if you'd like to come home for spring break. Not because you have to, but because I miss you." There was a long silence on the other end. and I was terrified she would decline politely, as she had so many times before. Instead, she said quietly, "I'd like that, Mom." It was the first time in years she had called me Mom instead of Margaret, and I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from crying right there on the phone. Emma's visit home that spring break was awkward at first, both of us carefully navigating around years of emotional distance, but for the first time since David's death, I made a conscious effort to be present, to really listen when she spoke, to ask questions that went beyond surface politeness. I learned that she had been struggling more than I realized, that the silence she had maintained for so many years wasn't just grief but a form of protection. She had been afraid to show emotion because she thought it would upset me, that she needed to be strong like I appeared to be. We were both trying to protect each other, and in doing so, we had built walls that kept us apart when we most needed to be together. One evening during her visit, we were sitting in the garden where I had seen her on her 16th birthday, the place where I had been too afraid to approach her years before. Emma was sketching in a notebook, something she had always done when she was thinking. "Mom," she said suddenly, not looking up from her drawing, "can I ask you something?" I nodded, my heart racing with anticipation and fear. "Do you ever miss Dad so much it feels like drowning?" Her question caught me completely off guard, not because it was inappropriate or unexpected, but because it was exactly how I felt every single day. For the first time in 8 years, I answered with complete honesty. "Yes," I whispered, "every day. I miss him so much that I thought if I let myself feel it, I would disappear completely." Emma looked up at me then, and I saw tears in her eyes, the first tears I had seen her shed since David's funeral. I stopped talking because I was afraid that if I said his name, if I talked about missing him, "You would break," she said softly. "And I couldn't lose you too." In that moment, I understood the terrible irony of our situation. We had both been trying to protect each other from grief, and in doing so, we had deprived each other of comfort, healing, and connection. I reached for her hand, something I hadn't done in years, and she didn't pull away. "Emma," I said, my voice shaking with 8 years of suppressed emotion, "I'm so sorry. I thought I was being strong for you, but I was just being scared. Can you forgive me?" What happened next changed everything. Emma squeezed my hand and said, "Mom, I forgave you a long time ago. But can you forgive yourself?" Her words broke something loose inside me that I had been holding too tightly for too long. The tears came then, not the controlled, private tears I had occasionally allowed myself, but deep, healing sobs that seemed to come from the very center of my being. Emma moved closer and put her arms around me, and we held each other in the garden while 8 years of grief and love and regret poured out of both of us. It wasn't pretty or dignified, and it wasn't the composed, controlled reunion I might have once imagined. It was raw and messy and absolutely necessary. That night marked the beginning of our real relationship, not the polite distance we had maintained for so many years, but a genuine connection based on honesty and vulnerability. Emma extended her spring break visit by a week, and we spent the time really talking, sharing memories of David, looking through photo albums we had both been afraid to open. She showed me her paintings, explaining the emotions and experiences that had inspired each one, and I began to understand that her art had been her way of processing feelings she couldn't express in words. I told her about the early days of my business, about the deals that had excited me, about the challenges I had overcome, but also about the loneliness and the fear that had driven me to work so obsessively. We also talked about the future, about what we both wanted our relationship to look like going forward. Emma was concerned that I had sacrificed too much for business success, that I had forgotten how to enjoy life outside of work. She wasn't wrong. I had been so focused on building financial security that I had neglected almost everything else that makes life meaningful. We made plans for regular visits, for trips we could take together, for ways to rebuild the family traditions that had died with David. It wasn't going to be easy. We had years of distance to overcome, but for the first time since David's death, I felt hopeful about the future. The summer after Emma's junior year, she came home to Connecticut for 3 months, and we worked together on transforming our house from a museum into a home again. We painted her room, hung her artwork throughout the house, and created spaces where we could spend time together comfortably. I reduced my work schedule for the first time in years, delegating more responsibility to my partners and focusing on building relationships rather than just building wealth. Emma taught me about art, taking me to galleries and museums, helping me understand the emotional language she had been speaking through her paintings all these years. I introduced her to aspects of the business world that interested her, and she surprised me with her insight into financial markets and investment strategies. The most significant change was that we began talking about David regularly, sharing memories and stories that kept him alive in our conversations. Emma told me about dreams she had, where he appeared to give her advice about painting techniques or college decisions. I shared memories of our early marriage, of David's terrible cooking experiments and his habit of leaving architectural sketches on every surface of the house. These conversations were often emotional, but they were healing rather than painful. We began to understand that grief doesn't have to be carried alone, that sharing memories and sadness can actually multiply joy rather than diminish it. As Emma's senior year of college approached, I realized that our relationship had become the most important thing in my life, more valuable than any business deal or financial achievement. I began to restructure my priorities, planning for a future where success would be measured not just by profit margins, but by the depth of my relationships and the richness of my experiences. Emma had chosen to write her senior thesis on art therapy for trauma recovery, inspired by her own experience of processing grief through painting. I was incredibly proud of her, not just for her academic achievements, but for her emotional courage in facing difficult topics and helping others. The moment that completed my transformation came on a cold February evening during Emma's senior year. She called me, as she did every few days now, but this time her voice was different, excited, nervous, anticipating something. "Mom," she said, "I have something to tell you, and I want to say it right, so please just listen." I sat down, my heart pounding with curiosity and a little fear. "I've been accepted to graduate school," she began, "but not for art. I want to get a master's degree in counseling, specifically to work with children who have lost parents. I want to help other kids the way I wish someone had helped me." She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "But the program is here in Connecticut, which means I'll be close to home for 2 more years. If you want me to be—" The emotion in her voice when she said those last words, "if you want me to be," broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. This brilliant, talented young woman was asking permission to stay close to home, to continue building the relationship we had started to repair. "Emma," I said, my voice thick with tears I was no longer ashamed to shed, "there is nothing I want more in this world than to have you close. I have missed so many years of your life, and if you're willing to let me, I want to be part of your future." There was a pause, and then Emma said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life. "I love you. Mom, I have always loved you, even when we couldn't find our way to each other." "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, and as I said those words, I realized that the woman who had sworn never to cry again, never to show weakness, never to let emotion control her, had been completely wrong about what strength really means. True strength isn't about building walls around your heart. It's about having the courage to tear them down when they're keeping you from the people you love. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about walking through it to reach healing on the other side. Emma graduated summa cum laude that May, and I was there in the front row, crying openly as she walked across that stage. David would have been so proud of the woman she had become, and I knew that somehow, somewhere, he was celebrating with us. After the ceremony, we had lunch at a small cafe near campus, and Emma presented me with a painting she had created as her final project. It was a portrait of our family, David, Emma, and me, but painted in a way that showed us connected despite the physical absence of one. David's figure was translucent but present, his hands reaching toward both of us, and Emma and I were painted with our hands touching, our faces turned toward each other with expressions of love and understanding. "This is how I see us now," Emma explained as I studied every brushstroke with tear-filled eyes. "Dad is always part of us, but we don't have to live in the past to honor his memory. We can build a future that includes his love but doesn't stop with his loss." I hugged her tightly, this wise, beautiful daughter who had taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that strength doesn't mean isolation, and that love is always worth the risk of pain. Today, 3 years later, Emma is finishing her master's degree and has already begun working with children at a local grief counseling center. I have transformed Hamilton Investments into a company that not only manages wealth but also provides financial counseling for widows and families dealing with sudden loss. We work together sometimes, combining her expertise in emotional healing with my knowledge of financial planning to help families navigate both the practical and emotional challenges of loss. Our relationship is now built on genuine intimacy, shared purpose, and deep mutual respect. The house that once felt like a museum has become a home again, filled with Emma's artwork, the sound of our conversations, and the laughter that returned gradually as we both learned to find joy again. We have dinner together several times a week, take weekend trips to art galleries and museums, and have developed new traditions that honor David's memory while building our future together. I still work hard and care about business success, but it's no longer the only thing that defines me or gives my life meaning. Last week, Emma told me she's been dating someone seriously for the first time, a fellow graduate student who shares her passion for helping children process trauma. As she described him, her face lit up with a happiness I hadn't seen since she was a child, and I felt a complex mix of joy for her happiness and bittersweet awareness that she was building an adult life that would eventually expand beyond our rebuilt relationship. But this time, instead of fearing change or trying to control it, I'm excited to see what the future holds for both of us. The woman who once swore never to cry again now understands that tears can be a form of strength, that vulnerability can be a gift rather than a weakness, and that love requires courage but offers rewards that no amount of money or professional success can provide. I learned that you can't protect yourself from loss by refusing to love deeply, and that grief shared is grief diminished, while joy shared is joy multiplied. If this story moved you, I'd love to know which moment resonated most deeply with you. Have you ever built walls to protect yourself that ended up keeping out the very people you needed most? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences help all of us feel less alone in our struggles, and please subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming loss, rebuilding relationships, and finding the courage to love again despite the risks. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that it's never too late to tear down the walls that separate us from the people we love most.